couple centrioles together and you get a centrosome. Alright, the other thing that's made out of microtubules that I wanted to discuss before moving on were the cilia and flagella. So these are things that stick out from the cell membrane. That's what this means here. Appendages from the cell membrane. They help the cell to move or to move materials that are near the cell. For example, you have little cilia on all your respiratory passageways. So the tubes that are bringing air in and out of your body have cilia on them to help move materials around, whether that be the mucus or the dust or other things that are stuck inside your trachea or your bronchioles, your airways. How they actually move, that's what this is talking about down here, is the microtubules slide against each other. Again, that's probably not something you need to know, need to write down, but just don't forget that they're based on microtubules again. So the main things with this is the flagellum, which is mostly for movement, and then the cilia, which could be used for movement of the cell or other materials around the cell, are extensions of the cell membrane of these microtubules that can do different things. Alright, now we're going to get specifically to the structures that are considered organelles or cell parts. And what they are basically meant to do is to make a little packet or a compartment within the cell for a specific type of function. So they compartmentalize the functions within the cell. So there's a little place where energy construction happens, there's a little place where protein construction happens. It's not just loose in the cytoplasm, there's a little walled-in structure within the cytoplasm where these different functions can happen. And down here, I just want to introduce this idea that usually between plant and animal cells we have basically the same organelles, except those centrioles we just talked about that are made out of microtubules are only in animal cells, and chloroplasts, which we'll talk about later, are present only in plant cells. But again, that'll come up later as we go through this as well. Alright, so on to our organelles. The first one we talk about is the ribosome. We did discuss this with the prokaryotic cell, or the bacteria as well. They have the same function in eukaryotic cells, that is to make proteins. And again, they can be found floating around in the cytoplasm. They're called free ribosomes. Or they can be attached ribosomes, in which case they're attached to something called the endoplasmic reticulum. We'll talk more later about what the endoplasmic reticulum, or the ER, actually is. So, main point, proteins are made by ribosomes. Again, we'll talk about those a lot more when we discuss how DNA directs the function of these ribosomes and how they work. Alright, we also have some energy-related organelles, the mitochondria and the chloroplasts. The mitochondria we'll talk about in a second, but I just want to make sure you understand that they are found in both plants and animals, but the chloroplasts are only found in plants, not found in animals. So we'll talk about the chloroplasts later on when we talk about plant structures. It's believed that once long ago that these were actually cells. The mitochondria was a type of cell, and the chloroplast was a type of cell, but eventually they ended up forming a symbiotic relationship with other cells. We have lots of symbiotic relationships now where two organisms live really closely together, like lichens, for example, where you've got algae and a fungus living together to help each other out. So that's what's thought to have happened to the mitochondria and chloroplast, that they were once cells and they developed this relationship with other cells that helps both of them. Alright, so first to the mitochondria. As I said, they're in both plants and animals because their function is to make energy, and both plants and animals need energy. How they do that is they take food. In the case of us, it's the food we eat. In the case of plants, it's the glucose that they make, and they make ATP. So make sure that you know they are making energy by breaking down food to make ATP. ATP, as we'll talk about more in a lot more detail, is the fuel that all cells need for their activities. So you can think of that as the form of energy that plant cells, animal cells, fungus cells, they all need this ATP in order to do what they need to do. So they all have mitochondria. All right, the next slide is about what's called the endomembrane system. So this is probably what you want to put as your heading for this section, the endomembrane system. You don't need to talk about everything that's up here at the top, but I want to discuss this with you real quickly. Endomembrane means the membrane within. So there are a lot of different membranes inside the cell, as well as, of course, the cell membrane around the outside of the cell. But these folded membranes inside the cell can make little compartments or organelles also. And what it does is it helps to transfer molecules through the cell and then eventually out onto the surface of the cell through the cell membrane. They're all made of a lipid bilayer with proteins stuck in them. So they have the same composition, the same makeup as the cell membrane. With those double layers of lipids and then protein stuck inside. So our endomembrane system then, what is in the cell that is considered part of this system? Let me get rid of my markings here. Okay, so 6 things we're going to go through here that are part of the endomembrane system. Remember, they might be compartments, they might be organelles, but they're all made of this lipid bilayer and help to move things around the cell. So the nuclear membrane, endoplasmic reticulum, Golgi apparatus, vesicles, lysosomes, and the plasma membrane, or the cell membrane. So you do want to write those down as the 6 parts of the endomembrane system. I'm going to start with the nucleus. People remember what the nucleus does. It has all the DNA in it. So its function is to separate the DNA from the rest of the cell. And of course, the DNA is the code for making proteins. So we're going to kind of talk about how that happens in relationship to the endomembrane system. There are a couple parts to the nucleus that are important to recognize. There is a membrane around it. Again, it's a double membrane. Separates the nucleus from the cytoplasm. And you can see that it has these little holes in it, or pores. And that allows, things to get in and out of the nucleus that the nucleus needs to send out. For example, RNA as a message. It also has little ribosomes stuck to it. So it does have a kind of bumpy appearance. And the very inside of the nucleus is the nucleolus, or the nucleolus. It's pronounced both ways. That's this kind of ball structure in the middle here. That is just a clump of DNA with different proteins, actually called chromatin, which we'll talk more about later, that help it kind of stay condensed in the middle of the nucleus.